Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for today's roundtable. We're going to be talking about housing havoc and debriefing the current federal budget. So this hour together has been designed to really help all of us to better understand how the federal budget may impact land development. So I want to go ahead and say a big thank you to Michael and Gil and Gagan for joining me today. Michael is joining us from Toronto, and a big focus for Channel Consulting in 2024 is to connect ideas between Vancouver and Toronto. So thank you for joining us. The format is that we're going to have 4 10-minute presentations followed by a 15-minute Q&A. And our goal is to wrap up promptly by 1 o'clock. So I'm really excited about the session. I'm excited about the group. I'm excited about the conversation. And we really encourage you to actively participate in the chat. And at the same time, I encourage you to be mindful that we have a very diverse audience. We have folks joining us from REITs, pension funds, and developers, as well as government and nonprofit staff. And we have folks joining us from our peer service providers. So I want to thank everyone. It's really important that we're having these conversations. That's how we solve a crisis, is by bringing diverse perspectives together. So if you want to see more content from us, certainly I welcome your ideas. I also welcome you to visit channelconsulting.ca. Past roundtables and masterclass sessions are available on our website under resources. If you go ahead and visit our media page, you can register for our June 4th masterclass, which will be about rental housing investment criteria. And finally, I encourage you to register for our weekly blog, which provides ongoing industry insights, but also has links to really helpful industry resources. Okay, so that concludes our welcome, and we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'll just go ahead and share my screen here. So I just want to start off with a territory acknowledgement and just really share my perspective that this land that we know as Canada goes back to time immemorial. And that actually gives me some hope that this current mess is going to get resolved over time in our housing crisis in Canada. So we have a federal deficit, which is close to $40 billion. And regardless of which polls you look at, the majority of Canadians are extremely concerned about the deficit. CMHC has indicated that we need 5.8 million homes to be built in Canada by 2023 to keep pace with immigration and population demand, which is 3.5 million homes more than have ever been built in Canada during that same time span. So that's the equivalent of an entire Vancouver being sprinkled across the country. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities indicates that the average cost of infrastructure per new housing unit is about $105,000. And we see that the capacity of our previous infrastructure investments in Canada in schools and hospitals and roads has already been met. Immigration targets are for an additional 500,000 new Canadians over each year for the next 3 years. And we're competing on a global scale to not only attract talent, but to retain talent in Canada. And so we can see that really our country needs problem solvers. So whether you're working with a REIT or a developer or a pension fund, whether you're working in government, whether you're working in a nonprofit group, whether you're one of our peer service providers, it's really a time that each one of us needs to be creative, needs to be radically candid in providing our perspectives and sharing our perspectives diversely in all of the rooms that we're in. We all have a role to step up and be problem solvers in our country at this time. So we've had our new federal budget that was released last month, and these are the highlights from the perspective of housing. I'm just going to be providing an overview, and my colleagues, Michael will be talking about transit investments, Gil will be talking about tax strategies, and Gagan will be talking her perspective from a developer on some of the problems with the current budget. But I'm going to be sharing from a project finance perspective, just an overview that as of June 25th, 2/3 of capital gains beyond 250,000 will become taxable. So that is perceived to be quite difficult by those with capital investments. The increased capital cost allowance rate is increasing from 4% to 10%. We have an expansion of the MLI Select program from 40 to 60 billion. We have expansion of the apartment construction loan program by 15 billion, and the introduction of the Canada Builds program, which is modeled on the BC Builds program. We have a longer amortization period for first-time home buyers, up to 30 years. From an infrastructure perspective, we're seeing the federal government align to the provincial government's views around transit-oriented development, with transit funding conditional on actions to accelerate housing delivery. So this is really speaking to front-end loading land use planning in order to confirm transit investments from a federal level. And then there are the supply side levers. The Housing Accelerator Fund, the federal government has had $400 million to help with permitting process improvements. We have Public Homes for Lands program, which is allowing long-term leases on federal lands. And we have initiatives to streamline the National Building Code. We also see support for renters, the Renters' Bill of Rights, which will enable transparency on previous rates, and the Rental Protection Fund, which is a Canada Rental Protection Fund modeled on the BC Rental Protection Fund, where the government is acquiring older buildings to maintain a stock of affordable rental housing. So again, I mentioned that what Canada needs right now is problem solvers, and that's what I'm trying to do. And everything that I'm doing with Channel Consulting and in launching the Uplift Fund is really to help unlock the housing problem in Canada. So in the work that I do, really the spine of everything that Channel Consulting does is our development feasibility assessment. So we do development feasibility assessments for all types of assets. They're always done within 30 days. And we find out from a regulatory perspective, the truth about what you can actually do with a piece of property. And so those are really helpful, not only with investment decisions, but also with disposition decisions. And right now, what we're seeing is under option 1 here, our insights are being used to inform decision-making about whether or not to shelve projects. It's really difficult to make the math work in the current environment. And so that's what we're seeing. With our development feasibility assessments, for our more sophisticated clients, REITs, pension funds, institutional groups, insurance companies, they typically have their own financial analyst team in-house. And so we are providing all of the inputs for their analysis. However, we do partner with a financial analyst to do all of the financial analysis on behalf of other groups such as families, nonprofit groups, and government organizations. So that's option 1. Option 2, when people receive our development feasibility assessment, they sometimes want to proceed with their project, and they hire us as a development consultant to navigate the approvals process. And then the third option is that we evaluate whether or not this project would be suitable for investment through the Uplift Fund. And so what the Uplift Fund does is it provides working capital through the pre-development phase to generate shovel-ready projects. And so really the purpose of Uplift Fund is to help fill the capital gaps that are happening right now. given, the difficulty in making the capital stack work for projects to proceed. We also notice that the groups that tend to be rental housing operators, they are happy to participate in the building because they want to make sure that they have an asset that they're going to want to hold long term. They're happy to build and hold the asset long term, but they're not interested in taking on the risk of the entitlement phase. And so they're looking for shovel-ready projects. And since there's no easy sites left, there's a real challenge in getting sites to shovel-ready, and that's where Uplift Fund comes in. So the investment criteria for Uplift Fund really focus on those sites where there's a government commitment to land use planning and to an investment in rapid transit infrastructure, where there's a development partner, where there's a parcel size that's really adequate to accommodate a scale of housing, 100 to 400 units, and that the asset is well positioned to be acquired by a rental housing operator. So those investors in Uplift Fund, they're just looking for pre-development exposure. So there really does need to be an exit. So that concludes my presentation around the federal budget. This is just an overview. Each of my colleagues is going to provide more detail, but I just wanted to, again, encourage each one of us that we should be really leaning in and coming up with ideas on how we can be part of the solution. Uplift Fund is my idea on how I can be part of the problem in the current environment, but I encourage everyone to think about ways that we can be resourceful and use the skills and talent that we have to help. Okay, I'm going to move on now and welcome Michael. Michael, if you could please go ahead and share your insights about the federal budget and transit investments.
Great. Thanks, Tegan. And thank you for bringing us all together to have a really great conversation, very topical and really great intro. In fact, many of the things I will say will riff or follow on what you started with, but just a couple of points I wanted to recognize. So we're actually the last 20 years in Canada have been a super exciting time for anybody involved in transit, because Canada has went from really doing a little bit here and there on the transit front, and we've built light rail projects or rail projects in pretty much every mid-size and certainly large metro area. And the federal government has been a funding partner in many, if not all, of those projects. And this federal budget, I'm not going to comment on the capital gains tax. I can leave that for my colleagues on the panel to discuss. I want to talk more about programming and kind of staying the course and maybe doubling down on the kinds of things that the federal government has already started. And these are, sometimes I would say our metro city regions, particularly the largest and fastest growing ones, like central southern Ontario and in Toronto, Vancouver. I mean, some of these cities are growing to levels that really weren't planned. They, decades and decades ago, planners did not imagine that central Ontario would become a mega region of greater than 10 million people. And so we're really making up for lost time. And so what this budget does is, I would say, again, stays the course on transit funding. There's allusion, they make reference to more grant funding that could come. They double down on the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which is a tool that is designed to enable and lever in private sector funding next to public sector funding, so you get more dollars in infrastructure for every dollar that the public sector invests, and also a little bit more focus on revenue generation, which in turn should generate the right kind of behavior at the municipal and provincial level in terms of project development. And so that's a long-winded way of saying we need projects that are designed to generate revenue and ridership and other things that that are more capital efficient. And we also need projects that result in housing and city building around projects. And you'll notice in the federal budget this year in particular, there was a lot of language around funding conditions or other types of guidance that signals that, hey, municipalities and provinces, if you guys want federal funding for specific initiatives, you need to play the game of tying these projects to housing. And I think that's a good thing. I think that's pushing in a wrong direction. I mean, in a good direction. Transit oriented development is the largest single lever. It's the largest housing type that we can develop to address the supply crisis. Now, the interesting thing is that the federal government, I mean, historically, given the way our federation is set up, it's really for the municipalities and the provinces to figure out housing. It's not for the federal government. But because it's such a huge problem, it's everybody's problem, and therefore the federal government has a role. And tying investments in physical infrastructure to the shape of cities is historically something the federal government has not done. And so this budget said things about doing that. So in that sense, this budget tried to address what has been a problem growing for a long time. And some people might say, well, too little, too late. But I would look at it and say it's a step in the right direction, and this is the kind of ongoing position the federal government will have to take. I think the other thing that there's a lot of research around now coming out, very interesting research. For example, Shoshana Sachs at University of Toronto, but there's other centers of infrastructure and housing in various universities around the country that are pointing out what is the kind of housing that is most needed. Because as we all know, there's different types of land use. There's traditional suburban growth, there's infill, and there's a variety of different kinds of infill. And what the research is telling us, if you think about our collective carbon budget and how we accommodate this huge amount of growth that large Canadian cities have to accommodate, and then our impending sustainability crisis and climate change and carbon budget, is we need cities that look more like our older suburbs and more like our downtowns, that are walkable and that are hyper oriented around active transportation and can enable car trips, but accommodate more longer trips on more sustainable forms of travel, like regional rail or transit. And so again, the federal government doubling down on or signaling that there may be more money announced for large grant-funded transit projects, the continued focus on via high-frequency rail, for example, in the Quebec and Ontario corridor, the province of Alberta coming to light with a regional rail plan that they're going to embark on, and then of course the ongoing noises around Cascadia, which is the high-speed rail corridor connecting Vancouver, Seattle, and Portland, that could be a backbone for many other kinds of community building. Those are all opportunities, and Cascadia is not really ready for a federal funding commitment. So I'm not saying the federal government, missed or didn't miss something by not making a comment on that, in any significant way in the federal budget. But the other thing I'll say, just a few more comments, and then I'll pass it on to my other panelists, and we can have a discussion. But is money, the federal government's in a difficult position in terms of having a direct impact on housing, because again, I said municipalities in the province, it's really their job to implement land use and policy and housings. But the money, they have tried to make an effort at putting money, both tying it to housing outcomes, but also being a partner in relieving bottlenecks. So things like dollars for planners and permissions and regulators, things that developers have complained about and saying, we don't have enough planners in our local municipality, and therefore it takes forever to get a planning application. I mean, those are bottlenecks that I don't think the federal government can solve on its own, but it's offered an olive branch and some money. How effective the federal government is at actually implementing and getting money from Ottawa to local municipalities to actually unblock those roadblocks will remain to be seen. I think dollars for projects specifically is something that some parties have asked for, and there's some money there for specific types of housing. The housing and real estate is the largest asset of any asset in the world. So to make a really big impact, you need trillions of dollars. And I'm not saying that's not the role for government. I don't think a lot of us on the panel would want to see that. But what the federal government can do and has tried to make an effort on, and I think all levels of government need to double down and perhaps even make a bigger effort on, is capacity building. And so this is where, if we're saying the greatest, most effective housing solutions are going to be in our cities, integrated with infrastructure, integrated sustainable systems, energy systems, that means collaborative and partnership type models that mix public infrastructure and private assets like housing and real estate need to be better. And that means you need really sophisticated partners on both sides, not just in the private sector, but also in the public sector. And again, Canada can be proud that it is one of the leading jurisdictions in terms of public-private partnerships, but we need to go further and we need to do more. So I would again look at, instead of the top line dollar amounts for certain initiatives, I think the harder work that remains to be seen is going to be around capacity building and ensuring that people and staff who work in government agencies that are executing on some of these projects are really capable and creative and able to partner with the private sector and demonstrate agility and the ability to do deals and realize transit-oriented development or realize integrated energy systems that can reduce our carbon impact and also reduce the operating cost and perhaps the total cost of the housing product. Because where we are seeing housing being delivered in the market is at the upper end to those who can pay. But I think where the real supply crisis exists is in households that can't afford housing. And so we need more affordable product. And how do we get to affordability? Well, not only is it reduce the cost of individual housing units, but it's reducing the cost of living in general. And if we can provide complete communities where people have access to great community centers, daycare, they can walk, they don't need to buy a car, which is a really expensive asset and depreciates, then that's going to be a way that we can address the housing crisis by addressing other kinds of community building. And I think that's where the federal government has said we can be a partner, but again, we need really good partnerships at the municipal, the provincial level, and then we need people at agencies who sit in between or sometimes partner with the private sector to make these things happen. So a big theme for me is the hard work of continuing to build capacity in industry and in sectors where we can realize these kind of creative partnerships to build complete communities in an urban setting. I'll leave it there, Tegan, and looking forward to the discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Michael, for your insights. Gil, looking forward to hearing from you.
Yeah, perfect. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today and to speak about some tax efficient strategies. I think it's a perfect segue from what Michael was saying in terms of getting the funding to be able to create all these partnerships. How can we build these communities? And I just want to share this with you. So a lot of the funding is actually going to be coming from the hike in the capital gains tax. The federal government is expecting to raise over $19 billion over the next 5 years from the increase in the capital gains tax. So that's a part of where the funding is going to be coming from. So today I'm going to take a different cut at this and share with you some strategies that incorporated business owners can use to offset and mitigate the increase in the tax liability from the increase in the capital gains tax. So just to clarify, Tegan said that in her PowerPoint there, she stated that anything over $250,000, capital gains will increase from 50% to 66.67. So that's correct for individuals. But did you know for business owners, they don't have that threshold. As of June 25th onwards, they're just going to be taxed on any capital gains. It's going to increase from 50% to 66.67. So it's just automatically going to increase. They're not going to get that threshold in where they'll only pay 50% tax. So this is creating a huge commotion within the tax community, especially for business owners. The government's expecting a lot of them to trigger the taxes before June 25th. So as a business owner, if you have investments, whether it's in the stock markets or in properties, if you're selling any of that before June 25th, you're going to have a huge tax bill. Okay, so the government's expecting that. So what can you do about that? And that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So again, this is specifically for incorporated business owners, and it's because they don't get that threshold of $250,000. So one thing that business owners can do is instead of paying the tax where they're not going to ever see that money again, a solution that they can use for themselves is to set up what's called an individual pension plan. An individual pension plan is the same as a defined benefit plan. So it's the same benefit pension plans that teachers have, that government workers have, judges have. As an incorporated business owners, you can actually set up your own pension plan for yourself. So you use the corporation to set up the pension plan. The corporation funds the pension plan for you, and it's a deductible expense to your corporation. So they can actually write that off. So one common strategy that a lot of people are talking about right now is for the business owners to set up the pension plan for themselves. They can use the contributions to offset the increase in the taxes, or the taxes that they incurred from selling any properties or investments before the June 25th date. And I'll share my screen with you just to give you a sense of what those numbers look like and what they can be. So think of an individual pension plan as an RSP, but for business owners. Again, for RSPs, you, the individual, you're making the contributions yourself, and you get to deduct it off your income. But for an IPP, an individual pension plan, the corporation makes the contribution and they get to write it off as an expense. So I'll give you an example here. If you look at, say, someone who is 60 years old and they set up an IPP now, so they set up the pension plan now. So there's two contributions that they can make. There's one called the past service. So what that means is that for all the years that you were not part of a pension plan, your corporation can put in a large lump sum into the pension plan to get it started. And in this case, the corporation can put in just under $700,000. So that's $700,000 in deductions that they can use to offset any taxes relating to that was triggered from the disposition of property or investments. They can use it now or in the future. So similar to RSP contributions, if you don't use all the contribution room now, it gets carried forward into the future years. So this is one great way to be able to not only reduce the amount of taxes that you have to pay. Again, when it comes to taxes, it goes to the government and you're never going to see that again. However, if you were to set up a pension plan for yourself, at least you're redirecting the money from the taxes and into a retirement savings for yourself that you can use at a later time. Another reason why people use this as well too, especially business owners, why they use this, is it does provide the highest degree of creditor protection, and the contribution limits as well too far exceed those of the maximum RSP. Last but not least, just to let you know that you can actually use this as a legacy to leave something for your loved ones. What I mean by that is that when you do pass away, if you name contingent beneficiaries, the money actually gets paid out directly to them versus being taxed all in one person's hand, in which you have that with regular RSPs. So I'll leave that for now. And if there's questions later, we'll answer that in the question period. And I'll pass this off to Gagan, our next panelist.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Gilbert, Michael, and Tegan. So yeah, I'm Gagan Sevilla. I do have a variety of letters and I do have a variety of hats that I like to wear. So I do hold an accounting designation and a financial planning designation from the past. I am one of the principals of Azure Properties Group, and I'm also faculty at BCIT, which is a polytechnic out in Burnaby, BC. What I want to actually focus on is a bit more of the impact that the federal budget is proposing to make on housing. Housing being obviously a hot topic and for strong and good valid reasons. So I've prepared a presentation. So just give me one quick second to set that up. Here. Did I just get a thumbs up if you can see it? Okay, perfect. So there you go. So here, let's see here. Yeah. So yeah, the Azure Properties Group, we focus on multifamily development. So my husband and I created this organization well over 10 years ago. We both come from a long line of other real estate development family members, and just kind of grew up in this. My husband is the technical brains of the situation, where he actually has a double master's in architecture and in urban planning and a degree in construction management. Myself, I hold a bachelor's in accounting, like I referenced earlier, a variety of other financial letters, and then also I'm a lead developer in a variety of our projects as well. So we do really focus on the community side of things. So we like to fly under the radar. We like to work alongside development, as well as the cities and the neighborhoods, to the effect that I was actually the president of a residents association. So I led the NIMBYs, okay? So the idea is that if you're community focused, you can truly get the yeses you need to get the right type of housing that is actually feasible and can work for all stakeholders, including those that will be living in the area and those that currently reside in the area. So the 6 key items of the federal budget I want to speak to, mainly because of time constraints. These were the 6 that, as I was scrolling down, it was just in order. So I just went with the first 6, not too much thought in that. So the capital gains rate, inclusionary differences that is increasing. So the rate itself is not going from 55 to 66 and 2/3. It's what is taxable is going from that. So overall, the impact ends up resulting in about a 10% increase, because there's other components that are associated with the calculation, including a refund component. But in the end, it is still an increase. It is still substantial and will affect you. Again, alluding to what Gilbert and Tegan were referencing, it depends on your situation, if you're personal or if you're in the company, and what can you do about it. There's building more homes, which is actually mentioned in the budget, which sounds great. And I agree. That's exactly what we do at Azure. We build more homes. And so obviously I want to align with that. And I'm just going to highlight some of the key concerns that get brought up there. There's the removal of GST for rental homes. And then there's the reality, so textbook, as I'm an educator, and then there's practical of what actually happens in the real world. The public lands for homes plan, the CMHC approved buildings set for market homes and for under market homes, sorry. And then obviously converting office buildings to rental. So those are the key components that I'd like to highlight. And all of these, in theory, should bring housing to the market and should, help our supply issue. So again, simple economics, if you change the supply and demand ratio, you should be getting better affordability and pricing, theoretically. Now, just straight from the Canadian government website, and of course, I will happily share all links with anyone that is interested. So they're recognizing that the last time that the government actually focused on housing was after the Second World War, and now. So that is when they're doing it, and that's where the focus has been. And at that time, so after the Second World War, in their website, they're recognizing the fact that Canada chose to build. Now, our current situation, housing of today, actually is flooded with restrictions, extra fees, other factors that cause construction delays, lack of affordable product, and we're still in that situation today. And this is our government recognizing their flaws. Now, not to say and suggest that this federal budget is going to figure this out, because in my perspective, it is not, but yeah, so anyways, we'll just go with the storytelling of this. So at least they recognize some of the issues here. So on the development community, exactly what Tegan says, it does actually cause an issue where do you even pursue it any further? And when we're in the development lens, you've probably purchased land, and land purchasing on commercial level, which is how developers buy, is not the same as residential. We are not given the same loan to value rates. We're not given the same interest rates, and we have to pay very, very high fees. So we are paying significantly more with more cash. So that means we have to put in more equity, and we have to pay stronger and higher fees just to hold that land. And then on top of that, of course, all the development expenses associated with that. To the situation where a lot of developers are at, where we don't know as a community if we can even build the asset that is actually desperately needed because of all these complexities that get layered in. So on the next slide, the changes to the capital gains. So I just want to highlight that. I did create an article and I'll share it in the chat, or you can just reach out to me directly on LinkedIn or just email info@azurproperties.group or gagan@azurproperties.group, and I'll happily share the article with you. Overall, the impact is that it is a terrible idea to your investment. So it's not helping. So like Gil's solution is actually a great one to take. There's obviously, there's other insurance strategies that one can take. Gilbert can happily discuss those ones at another time. It is a bit complicated to go through, but overall, the solution to do if you are a landowner is you might want to consider actually helping the housing situation by actually mobilizing your land, mobilizing it by making it a development project rather than just a passive rental. If you own rental property or bare land and it's not doing anything for you, you are going to be hit by this increase. There's no anything about that. It will happen to you. And so what you should consider doing is work alongside us, Tegan, anyone that can actually help mobilize your land and get it through the entitlement process. And a part of that means that you will be densifying your land, and that actually you'll probably make more money because not just the tax savings because you're going from passive investment to an active investment, but you're also going to actually be adding more units and value. As you go through entitlement, you change the intrinsic use of your land, which actually allows for stronger profitability. A lot of other considerations are at play there, but at the end of the day, the math does result in more money in your pocket if you follow this through. So again, there's an article about this, and it is a bit of a conversation that needs to be had, but there's a good chance that if you own land, that we can help you and actually navigate this appropriately while solving your community's issues of needing more housing. Now, in the federal budget, there's this concept of building more homes. I agree with that. The issue with building more homes is what's not being said. What's not being said is that as long as this was announced, and this table over here is comparing 2022 to 2020, the development cost charges, which is what a developer needs to pay when we're changing the use of the land or we're adding density, keeps increasing to the point where it actually doesn't add value. It actually takes away value. So instead of it becoming affordable, you're making a house cost significantly more. So depending on what the product ends up being, if it's single family to low rise, high rise, whatever have you, the significance is that the fees associated with building that home, prior to even building, is just getting the application through, is astronomical. The charges keep increasing. And this is just from 2022. Just this past year, from 2023 and 2024, some of the cities have increased their DCCs, which is their development cost charges, by an additional 233%. So if you live in $1 million home, let's say, wherever it may be, whatever type of dwelling it may be, it actually about $360,000 of that $1 million home goes to development cost charges to the city. So how is that allowing for affordability to exist? So there are a variety of developers that are trying to sound the alarm and make sure that people are aware. And the issue is that as the government continues to provide these incentives, the offset is that municipalities keep increasing their fees. So even Metro Vancouver, which is actually trying to provide this level of affordability and attainability, they themselves increase their fees. And then Ontario as well. When I was doing this research, I was making sure that I'm looking at Vancouver and Ontario examples, or BC and Ontario examples. The fees are happening as an increase across all major cities. The removal of GST is also noted in the budget. Now, the funny thing is, this is great. Removing GST for a rental project, a purpose-built rental project, is fantastic. I agree with that. What I don't agree with that, in order to get your rental, sorry, I can't help laughing at some of these things. When you're going through the process of getting your rental project, your purpose-built rental, one of the key factors that you're going to be utilizing is CMHC, because they actually have a fantastic financing program. And in order to utilize that, you can actually make your project dollar out and actually have a strong, viable project. The offset to this was that CMHC keeps increasing their fees, therefore making that very lucrative and interesting financing option that makes this whole project make sense more expensive. So with every lever that's being announced in the media, there's at least 5 that are behind the scenes kind of ruining that incentive. And that's the part that when you're really in the weeds, you truly have to understand what are you dealing with. And that's where the sophistication really matters. The public lands for homes plan. This is also noted in the budget. I agree with that. If the city owns land, use it, right? Utilize it, solve your community issue. And some cities actually don't own land. So being from the Lower Mainland, I know our area a little bit better than Ontario. The city of Abbotsford, which is kind of a farming community east of Vancouver by about an hour, they actually are surrounded by ALR, Agricultural Land Reserve, and ALR land is just not something that you can develop. And if you do go through that process, there's a very convoluted way to get it out of it. And 9 times out of 10, it's never going to happen. But because they're essentially landlocked, Vancouver, Richmond, we're landlocked by water, they're landlocked by agricultural land. They actually have 0 land to develop on. And with that, they can't utilize this. Even the lands that were identified in some of these projects, the federal budget only identified, I think, 6 different lands when it came to a different type of conversion that I'll talk to later. They're the federal government. Should they not have recognized more? Now, this link that I'm just going to try to pull up is fascinating because I previously live in the city of New Westminster. And here, it's just trying to pull up this article. The city of New Westminster actually has designated land for supportive housing. And a part of that, they agree. They say, yes, we have this land. We're ready to go. All we need is BC Housing to let it happen. And so they go ahead, apply. They've got everything ready to go. They fast-tracked it. And the issue is that BC Housing refused them the funding. So even with their own government bodies just simply cannot get it done. So if you can see this screen, this is just that article where the New Westminster mayor actually got put on, the city of New Westminster got put on that BC Housing Target Plan to increase their housing targets for the city. And they pushed back, and they pushed back hard because they said that the only area in which they're not succeeding is where they're actually relying on the government to give them money. So I thought that was pretty comical. Here. Are we back to my slide? Yeah, okay, perfect. Here. And then so the other part of the budget that was showcased was CMHC approved buildings for underused housing. So again, this is another example where essentially you want that affordability component. Now, affordability is fantastic. I agree with that as well. But the reality is that even the owner of the building has to pay the mortgage. And if the rent coming in does not pay enough for the mortgage to be satisfied, you will get foreclosed. It doesn't matter who you are, you will not making your debt obligations. This is in the city of Merritt, and this is just, as you can see from the date, May 14th. So this just happened. So BC Housing has granted and allowed for this building to be built, whereas it's very different for some of the other projects that actually don't cross the finish line because they don't even get built. This one got built within a couple years. So it was actually completed in November 2022. We're in May of 2024, and it's actually getting foreclosed on because they can't meet their debt obligations. So when the value of affordability is so low and that's what they put on the developer or the project, it can't meet its debt obligations. When you, BC Housing, are the ones that are satisfying that debt and you're the lender, you have to foreclose on it. Tell me something's not right, right? Now, one of the other items that were brought up into the budget was converting the underused federal office buildings to rental. Now, in Ontario, if you're familiar with the news that's going on there, a lot of folks agree, right? Office buildings are not being utilized and really should be captivated in a different way. Housing is obviously another common concept that a lot of cities are toying with. It is complicated. It's not an easy transition. However, in Ontario, if you remove an office building from use and convert it to housing, which is needed, you must replace that elsewhere. So you're going to use a system, like a building that doesn't function in an urban setting, and you're asking somebody, help me solve the housing crisis, but you need to now replace this unusable asset in a different area that probably wouldn't even function anyways. Where's the logic in that? So there are luckily some conversations about changing that, but that's the issue overall that we're having. So as in the development community, you see some media hyper of conversation of all these wonderful things that the government is proposing. But the concern that I have, and as well as I'm also an active member of a variety of other organizations that we can get into later, but that's a part of the conversation that the development community keeps trying to have with municipalities in the province, as well as the federal government, is let us in the room. Let us have conversations. Our entire mandate is just to build homes, but yet the rules that they play and the restrictions that they place make sure that attainability cannot happen. It makes sure affordability cannot happen. And so it makes it very challenging to allow for any of these things to actually exist. Now, being a developer and kind of, hitting our heads up against the wall over and over again, it makes you wonder, why don't I just go back to my other career and other career choices? And the reality is that we need homes. We have enough people coming into the country, that we have enough citizens already in our country and residents, that we actually need to provide these homes. So then the reality is that if you work alongside a sophisticated developer with myself, Tegan, and even Michael, we have solutions that we can play with. We can get the density that you need to make sure that your project pencils out, and you have that juice that allows you to exist and allows your project to be feasible in the appropriate way. So a lot of these are major concerns and major factors, but at the same time, some of these budgetary items are not as glorious and glamorous as they are, but there are solutions behind it. So I definitely recommend you to get in touch. And so, as you can see, there's a lot of news articles out there that actually showcase the need and desire for housing. So I do believe in the product. I do believe in our community. I do believe in our solutions, but at the same time, it does require more planning and more that team. So it does take a village in this situation. So there you go. I'll take it back and send it back to Tia. Oh, and feel free to get in touch with me.
Thank you so much, Gagan, for your presentation, for your candor, for your ideas. We're going to open it up now to a Q&A. Actually, Des, would you be able to put the spotlight on each of the different presenters so that there's 4 of us on the screen? Okay, excellent. Great. Okay, so we're starting to have some good conversation in the chat, but what I wanted to do is really just open it up to folks to offer any questions that you might have. Is there any questions that you'd like to put into the chat, anybody? We're having some discussion about DCCs. So thank you, Gagan, for mentioning DCCs. This is a really important issue. We recently had a couple of really disappointing surprises in the fall coming from Metro Vancouver, and also just recently in the city of Toronto, where there was an increase in DCC rates, which will actually kill the pro forma on many housing projects within 2 of the biggest urban centers in Canada, where we're most desperate for housing. And so one of the missed opportunities that I certainly saw was that the Housing Accelerator Fund wasn't explicit in its intentions around helping municipalities to resolve this issue. Now, Michael's provided some really great feedback in here. Oh, and I've got Ottawa also was faced with an 11% increase. That Michael, you've also shared here a little bit about some of the work that the Federal Infrastructure Bank is doing. Do you want to maybe chime in and just share a little bit about how that may be helpful in easing the burden on DCCs on housing?
Sure. I want to say I'm really enjoying the chat that's going on in the chat bar here, and it's interesting that the general theme of helping the municipalities and the provinces in particular, and the federal government having a role in maybe strong arming them or helping them get out of the way so that the market can act flexibly. So things like building conversions, we have these dying assets in some of our suburbs, these commercial retail plazas and things like this, and yet it can be very difficult to convert those to such badly needed housing. So sometimes, very often, our rigid land use zoning controls, which have been put in place with the best of intentions, but are having these longer term unintended consequences of really limiting the availability of the market and land to be provided for housing. Now, in some cases, it makes sense to preserve certain pieces of land for certain long-term economic uses. I get that, but I think there's a need to really address and understand that there are parcels out there that will never be, heavy industrial job creators the way they were in the 50s or 60s. And it's okay for the market to get really creative about mixed communities that are walkable and combine and allow people to access jobs and services in an efficient way. So I think that's a big part of it. And that's the foundational idea, I think, behind the work of the Canada Infrastructure Bank, identifying that they will not finance private development at low cost, but they will finance public infrastructure, which enables private development, things like district energy systems or public transit hubs or other public infrastructure that enables the kind of vertical efficient complete communities. So I'm happy to talk about it offline. We started doing some work with a major transit-oriented development project that incorporated a GO train station, actually, just on the western waterfront in Toronto here, at Park Lawn and Lakeshore. And it was really good to see a couple years after our work that the CIB effectively came out with a program that was very similar to the one-off sort of pilot project that we had come up with, working between the Canada Infrastructure Bank and developer consortia investor group that had a really big vision for a site, but needed some help because there were some really big public infrastructure moves required to make the master plan work. In particular, enabling a very complex phase one to get underway. And of course, when the pro forma ticks out returns that are based on phases 3, 4, 5, 6 of a big development site, the biggest hurdle is one of the biggest hurdles can be overcome perhaps by giving really low interest infrastructure financing to the most expensive component on the very front end of the project. So that was what we were involved in. And the reality is the CIB is quite interested in entertaining ideas like this. So there's always an open door to discuss ideas consistent with their policy objectives.
Okay, awesome. That's super, super helpful. Okay, I just want to acknowledge that we're 3 minutes to the end, and I do like to finish promptly because I respect people do have other things happening in the afternoon. I'm gonna just look at one final question or comment from John Gilmore. Hi, John. I think the federal budget should have addressed the timelines for municipal approvals. I think we need serious deregulation in all aspects. I don't agree that district energy systems are a good idea. If the system goes down, all the buildings online are affected. Right. Yeah. So really, in terms of the Housing Accelerator Fund, more expectations around what does it mean to move to a professional reliance model. That's what I'm hearing, John. And I think that in small communities across this country, we build safe infrastructure with a professional reliance model. Across the world, we build safe infrastructure with professional reliance model, but for some reason we can't do it in our urban centers. So I think that there is a challenge there that the federal and provincial governments need to issue on municipalities. I agree, John, that
Sorry, I was just going to interject there. So John, I appreciate that. So 2 parts I feel. One is I've actually been advocating to most cities and any policymaker that is willing to listen to me. Doesn't mean they're actually listening, but I do believe that. So as a professional, I adhere to a regulatory body where I have to have a code of conduct. I have to continue doing my PD, whatever have you. And so why not allow the professionals who are under regulation, a regulatory body, to make decisions rather than, yes, municipalities by all means, approve it, be the stamper at the end of the day. But my personal liability, my professional liability is based on me doing what is right. So as an accountant, Obviously, if I do something silly, I can get fined and more serious consequences. Engineers, architects, all of those major professionals actually have their personal liabilities on the line when it comes to these kind of things. So if you can actually have a peer review system, I think that would be stronger and faster, because as a developer, my first place to take my project is a planning department. Planning departments actually have a lot of interpretation, in my perspective, which is beyond their education and their experience. So to be told that my building architecturally isn't as whatever as that particular planner who actually only has a 2-year diploma, rather than my husband who has a master's degree and all those other things, as well as our architect that we hired. So we kind of had that in-house peer review. And so instead of taking that back and forth and then finally just saying, what do you want? And we will simply build it. It just gets a little bit cumbersome, where if you allow for a peer review system where everyone's liability is on the line, no one's going to cheat that system because it's not worth it for this one project. So you can actually speed up the process if you do that. And then the other half of that conversation, I think, is referencing some of the electrification issues that are existing, and as well as the requirements that they're putting on. The ESG reporting requirement for the city of Vancouver is insanely cumbersome. And you have to go through Energy Star, which we can get into. Like, I actually do finance transformation consulting as well. And it is very challenging to get these reports. And it's very challenging just on the data side. Forget the actual build side. So definitely there's a lot more that can be done. And I really agree that private sector needs to be leading the charge instead of being told what to do after people that have never done it before add in all these regulations.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. We're out of time. I just want to say thank you so much to all three of you, Gagan, Gil, Michael. Thank you for sharing your insights. We could have gone on for probably 2 hours. We had a very compressed session. We I think I can say all of us would welcome you to reach out if you have any follow-up questions for any one of us. Please reach out. Also, please fill out the feedback form. Let me know what other topics you'd like to talk about. Certainly welcome to do a deep dive with any of the three of these folks in the future. So thank you everyone for joining us. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.